Hey everyone, in this video you'll learn how to use the melee combat system asset to add combat to your game. We'll set up a hand combat system with combos, charged attacks, finishers, blocking, counter attacks, knockdown state, ground attacks, and much more. We'll also set up a simple sword combat system and learn how to use the asset with any external weapons. So let's start the video. So here I have a simple scene with a plane and 4 walls. So I'll be showing you how to set up combat in the scene. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add the player character. So for that I'll go to Tools, Combat System, Create Character, and we can use this window to create the player character and enemy characters. Alright, so to the character model field, we have to assign an FBX file of a character. So let me just choose the default character that comes with the asset. Alright, I'll just drag and drop it onto the character model field and I'll click the create character button. Okay, so this added the character. So here it adds a game object called combat controller, and under that we have the character, the third person camera, and the enemy manager game object that's required for the combat to work. Okay, so the scene just became really dark. The reason is because the main camera had a post process layer, and since we added a new camera, that layer should also be attached to this. Okay, so you won't have to do this if you don't have post processing in your scene, but just make sure that anything that you want attached to your camera should be attached to the third person camera. But I'll just add it in just to make the scene look a bit better. Okay, and now we don't need the main camera anymore. The third person camera will be our main camera. All right, so I'll go ahead and delete that. So now we have a basic character, and if you run the game, we should be able to run around the scene. Okay, if your player is falling through the plane, that is because your ground layer in the locomotion controller script attached to the player might be different. So here my plane is in the default layer, so that's the reason why the ground layer is set as default. Okay, so if your layer is different, be sure to set it over here. All right, so now our character can run around the scene. So next we want the character to be able to perform attacks, right? So let's add that. So to add attacks to a player, first we need to create a weapon for our player. All right, so if you select the player game object and look at the melee fighter script, here we have a field for the weapon, right? But that is empty right now. So to be able to perform attacks, a fighter should have a weapon. So even if your combat is hand-to-hand combat, you still need to create a weapon. That's because this weapon will be the container that will hold all the attacks that the fighter can perform. All right, so let's go ahead and create a weapon. So here in our tutorial folder, I'll right click and select create, and under combat system, I'll select on create weapon. Okay, I'll just call this weapon bare hands because I'm trying to set up hand-to-hand combat. All right, so this weapon is a scriptable object, and every weapon will have an icon of sword like this, and the weapon will have a list of attacks. Okay, it has a list of attacks and a list of heavy attacks, and this is where we specify what attacks can a fighter perform when they're equipped with a weapon. Okay, so here we can go ahead and click on this plus button to add an attack, and we can add attacks of different types. So an attack can be of type single, combo, stealth, and ground attack. So for our first attack, let's just add a simple combo, and these are the conditions under which this attack should be performed. Okay, you can use these conditions to make the player perform different attacks at different distance. So for example, for 0 to 2, you can perform some short range attacks, and then from 2 to 5, you can perform long range attacks and all that. Okay, and similarly, we also have a health threshold over here. So this is really useful for creating finisher attacks. So let's say if the player's health is less than 10%, then you can perform some kind of finisher attacks, and otherwise you can perform normal attacks. Okay, so that's the use of conditions. And below that, you have to specify the actual attacks. Okay, so here we need to assign attack data, which is a scriptable object that contains all the data about an attack. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some attacks. So let me just create a folder to organize things. I'll just create a folder called attacks, and in here I'll go ahead and create an attack from the combat system menu. Okay, so for hand combat, I'll be using animations from the Kobold's Fighting Animset Pro asset, but you can use any animation that you have, or you can create your own animations. All right, so let's say I want to add a basic attack like left hook punch. So this is the scriptable object of an attack, and it'll have an icon like this that shows a player attacking. So here we have to specify all the data of the attack. So the most important data is the animation clip of the attack, right? So first let's assign that. I'll just search for hook underscore L for left hook, and we'll be using this left hook animation from Kobold's hand-to-hand animation set. Okay, so once you assign the attack animation over here, you'll be able to preview it from this window. All right, so the attack scriptable object has a preview window like this, where you can preview the attack and reaction and all that. Okay, so this is the attack. You can choose any attack that you have. I'm just using this attack animation from Kobold's asset. So the next data that we have to specify is the impact time of the attack. So this is the window in which the impact of the attack happens. Okay, so it's really important to specify the impact time correctly, because other characters will only take the hit of this attack when this attack is in the impact time. Okay, so in the system, we're dividing an attack into three parts: wind up, impact, and cooldown. So wind up is a part where the character loads the attack, the part up to this, and the impact is the part where the character hits the opponent, and the cooldown is the part where they pull their hand back and go back to the idle state. All right. So here we just have to mark the impact portion, and the system will automatically understand the wind up and cooldown portion of that attack. Okay. So the impact portion is from here to here, so around frame 19 to frame 28. Okay. So here we have a double slider. So the start of the slider should be placed at the first frame of the impact, and the end should be placed at the last frame of the impact, so around 28. Okay, so this is the window in which the impact of the attack will happen. So for every attack, it's important to specify the impact window correctly, right? So that's it for the impact time. Next, we have a simple boolean here called wait for next attack. It just states that whether we should wait until this attack is complete before starting the next attack. Okay, so we won't need this for most cases. We'll just need this for some special attacks. So we can leave it at false. So next, we have to specify the hitbox to use. So the hitbox can be left hand, left foot, right foot, and weapon. So in this case, since we are throwing a left hook, the hitbox to use will be left hand. Okay. And by the way, one thing I forgot to mention is if this preview window is small for you, you can also click on this open button and it'll open a preview scene in which you can preview the animation. Okay. So if you want to see something clearly, be sure to go to the preview scene instead of just viewing it from the preview window over here. All right. So the hitbox to use will be left hand. So next we have a checkbox called is finisher. So we can turn it on for finisher attacks, but this is not a finisher attack, so I won't turn it off. And then we have another checkbox called rotate to attack, which indicates if the character should rotate towards the target during the attack. So we want it to be true for most of the attacks. Next we have the damage of the attack. You can give any value over here. And then we have things like hit direction, reaction tag, and all that. So this is used to determine what reaction to use for the attack. Okay, so I'll be explaining these things later. We'll only need to specify these if we are directly assigning the reactions to the weapon. Okay, so there are multiple ways to specify the reaction of the attack. You can either specify it in the weapon over here, or the easiest solution is to just specify the reaction as a clip in the attack data itself. Okay, so if I turn on the override reaction, I can just assign a clip over here. So let me just find a clip for the reaction of a left hook. So I'll search for hit, and we have a hit in the left direction. I'll just choose the weak one. Okay, and then under the reaction we have other fields like will be knocked down, is synced, and all that. We don't want to check any of these. I'll be explaining these when we add more complex attacks. Okay, so we have added the reaction, and you can also preview the reaction right from this preview window. Just change the attack to reaction over here, and you should be able to play the reaction. Okay, so this is a reaction that we want to use. So yeah, these are the basic data that you need to specify for an attack. And then there are more advanced data. So for example, if you have blocking, you can give a different block reaction, and then you can also give a counter for this attack, and you can use motion warping to move the attacker towards the target. So yeah, you have lots of things that you can specify for an attack, but the most important things are the animation clip, impact time, hitbox, and reaction. Okay, and by the way, we also have effects over here. It's a fold out. So here you can give sound effects or particle effects when this attack is performed or when this attack hits the target. Okay, so actually let's specify a sound effect when this attack hits. So I'll be adding an audio clip called punch one in the hit sound. So this will only be played if the attack hits the target. Okay, if you want to play a swing sound for the attack, then you can put it in the strike sound. All right, I don't have an audio for that right now, but you can do it if you want. All right, so we have created our first attack. So now let's just duplicate this and create the second attack. So I'll call this one right hook. All right, so we need to change these data for this attack. So for the right hook, I'll select the hook underscore R animation. So this is just a hook punch with the right hand. Okay, so we have to change its impact. So I'll let the impact start from here, and I'll end it somewhere over here. All right. So next I'll change the hitbox use to right hand because this animation is performed with the right hand. And we also have to change the reaction. So this is hit high left. I'll change that to hit high right. Okay. So yeah, I changed all the basic data of the hook. You can give a different sound over here if you want, but I'll just use this same sound effect. All right. So we have created two attacks, left hook and right hook punch. So let's go ahead and add these attacks to our weapon and let's create a combo. So here for the first attack, I'll assign the left hook punch. All right. And I'll click on the plus button to add another attack in our combo. And I'll choose right hook punch for that. Okay. So next we have to assign this weapon to the melee fighter script of the player. So let me go ahead and do that. And now if we test the game and if we press the attack input, you can see that the player is performing a left and right hook combo. Alright, so our attacks are working fine, but we don't have an enemy that can take these attacks and react to it. So let's go ahead and add an enemy next. So to add the enemy, I'll go to combat system and open the create character window. And let me just assign a character model for the enemy. Okay. And for the enemy, we have to check this is enemy checkbox. So let's go ahead and hit create character to create the enemy. So it's created at the same position of the player right now. So let me just move it over here and I'll just rename this to enemy. All right. So this enemy will also have scripts like melee fighter, and we can also assign the weapon for the enemy so that they can also perform attacks and take hit and all that. So let me assign the bare hands weapon that we created for the enemy also. And by the way, melee fighter is a really important script. Here you can specify things like the weapon, the health of the character, its preferred fighting range, a lot of default animations like death animations and all that. So both the player character and the enemy character will have this script. So yeah, let's try testing this with the enemy. All right. So we can try hitting the enemy and you can see that the enemy is playing the hit reaction. Okay. But right now the enemy can't chase us. The reason for that is because the movement of the enemy is controlled by using nav mesh, but we don't have a nav mesh in our scene right now. So let's go ahead and add a nav mesh surface. I'll just right click on the hierarchy window and I'll go to AI and add a nav mesh surface. And from here, we just have to click on the bake button. All right. And now if we test, the enemy should be able to follow us. All right. You can see that the enemy is following us. And when the enemy is close to us, he will perform attacks. Okay. And by the way, you can see that after we performed a few hits, the enemy just became stuck like this, and you're not able to attack the enemy anymore. So the reason for this is because the enemy is dead after taking too many hits, but we don't have a death animation right now. So let's fix that and let's add a death animation for the enemy. So if you go to the melee fighter script, here under the optional parameters, you have a foldout called default animations. So just open that and down here you have a list called death animations. Okay, So here we can add some knockdown animation that we can play when the enemy is dead. Okay, so I'll just use this animation called KO underscore head. So we can actually add this death animation for the player also in case the player dies. Okay, so now when the enemy dies, he should play the death animation. All right, so that is working fine. So the enemy died after 5 hits, right? So that's because the health of the enemy is 25 and each of our attack has damage of 5. Okay, so after 5 hits, the health will become 0 and the enemy will die. And by the way, you can increase the health of the enemy if you want. So let me just change it to something like 50, and I'll also increase health of the player to something like 100 so that they won't die that fast. Alright, so we have added basic attacks, reactions, and death animation. So now let's start creating more complex attacks. So let's look at charged attacks next. So when you select the weapon and look at the list of attacks, here along with each attack, we also have a checkbox called can be charged. Okay, so charged attacks are attacks where the user has to press and hold the input for some time. Okay, so in the system you can add a charged attack at any position of the combo. So yeah, let's try creating a charged attack. So usually charged attacks will be a bit more powerful attack. So let me create a new attack for that. I'll create an attack and I'll call it right low kick. Okay, I'm just creating attacks with the animations that I have. So here first let me assign the attack clip. Alright, so this is the animation that I want to use. Okay, so the hitbox to use here will be the right foot because this is a kick. Alright, and since this is a charged attack, we can give it a bit more damage, something like 10, and we can also add its reaction. So this is like a powerful kick that can knock down the enemy. So for the reaction, I'll search for KO and I'll choose the low KO R. You can preview this reaction from here. Okay. So since this is a reaction in which the character will be knocked down, we have to check the will be knocked down checkbox. Okay. We'll get back to this. I'll actually show you what will happen if this is not checked. So first let's test the charge attacks. And by the way, I missed to specify the impact time. So let me do that. So we can start the impact from somewhere around here and we can end it over here. Okay, so let's actually try performing this as a charged attack and then we'll get back to the will be knocked down checkbox. So here I can just check the can be charged checkbox and I can assign the right low kick into this. I have few of them over here because I've been creating different attacks in the scene. Okay, so now if we hold the attack input instead of just releasing it immediately, the player should perform the low kick instead of the left hook. Okay, so let's try that. So if I hold the attack input, you can see that the player is performing the right low kick. And if I just release the attack immediately, the player will perform the left hook just like before. Okay, so we can have charged attacks at any part of the combo. So this is like a common feature in games like Batman Arkham series and Sleeping Dogs and all that. You can hold the attack at any point of the combo and the player will perform different attack based on where the combo is. Okay, so if I just turn this off and add the charge attack to the second attack of the combo, so now the player will perform the charge attack if we hold the attack input after the first attack of the combo. Alright, so if I press the attack once and then hold the attack, you can see that the low kick is performed as the second attack of the combo. Okay, so you can chain different charged attacks in the combo and make it like this. So here, if I charge third attack, the player will perform a knee, and if I charge the fourth attack, the player will perform a spin kick. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just add this single charge attack, but yeah, you can have it at any point of your combo. Okay, so next, let's look at what will happen if we perform this attack on our enemy. Okay, so the enemy fell down and just got back up instantly, right? So that is because we haven't marked the attack as a knockdown attack. Okay, so in here, under the override reaction, we have to mark this as will be knocked down because this reaction will make the player. Okay, I selected the wrong attack. This was the one I was supposed to select. Alright, so yeah, this reaction will make the player drop down to the ground. So for such reactions, we have to turn on the will be knocked down checkbox. Okay, and then we have to specify the knockdown direction. So in this attack, the player is lying on his back, right? So we can set the knockdown direction to lying on back, and we can also specify the time range for which the player should lie down. Okay, so here I'm giving the time to be between 1 and 3 seconds. So the system will take a random value between that range. Alright, so if you want the player to lie down for longer times, then you can increase this value like this. Okay, so now it will lie down for 3 to 5 seconds. Okay, so we've marked this reaction as a knockdown reaction. So next, we also have to assign the lying down clips in the melee fighter. So in the melee fighter, we can assign clips for lying down and getting back up. So lying down clip will be the clip that will be looped while the player is down. Okay, and the get up clip will be played for the player to get up back onto the ground. All right, so you can also specify that clip from here, right from the attack. So here you can click on override lying down animations and you can specify the clip from here. But since the lying down clip and getting up clip is common for almost all the attacks, we can specify it directly in the melee fighter and we don't have to specify it again and again for each attacks. Okay, so I'll be specifying it over here. So here we have two types of animations, lying on back and lying on front. Okay, so this attack drops the enemy in such a way that the enemy will be lying on the back, right? So let me go ahead and assign the animation in that field. So let me just search for lay on back loop clip. It's just a clip where the player will lay on the ground and keep looping. Okay, so next we have to specify the get up animation over here. So let me search for get up and I'll just use this animation, get back up. Okay, now if you have attacks in which the player drops and lays on his front and not on back, then you also have to specify these animations. For now, I'm going to skip them because I don't have any attacks of that sort. Okay, so let's try testing this. And now you can see that if I perform the low kick, the enemy is getting dropped down, and after lying down for a few seconds, the enemy will get up and return back to the fight. Okay, so that is working fine. So next, when the enemy is lying down like this, our player should perform ground attacks like kicks on the ground instead of just performing their normal attacks, right? So let's look at how to create ground attacks next. So let me add a ground attack next. So under attacks, I'll just duplicate the right hook and create another attack called ground attack. Okay, and for this attack, I'm going to use this low kick animation. So let me just search for that. So yeah, this is the animation I'm going to use. Okay, and let's define its impact time. So we can start the impact from here and we can end it somewhere around here. All right. So for this attack, the hitbox to use will be right foot, and then let's also define the reaction for it. So for the reaction, let me search for something like ground hit, and I'll choose this animation called hit on ground back. And one thing you have to notice that for the reactions of the ground attacks, rotate to attacker should be turned off. Okay, it'll look weird if the enemy rotates towards the attacker after taking the attack while the enemy is lying down, right? So that has to be turned off for all ground attacks. And now let's add this attack to our weapon. So right now in our list of attacks, we only have a single attack, which is a combo, right? So let's add another attack, and the attack type of this attack should be ground attack, right? And for the attack data, I'll choose the ground kick that we created. Yeah, I named it ground attack. So let me select that. So now when the enemy is down, the player should be able to perform the ground attack instead of performing the normal combos, right? So let's try testing that. Okay. And by the way, I did not add sound effects for the low kick. So let me add that. I'll just use this punch 2 sound effect for some variety. Everything else uses punch 1. Okay. So let me try testing it again. All right. And now if I try to attack the enemy while the enemy is knocked down, as you can see that the player is performing ground attacks instead of normal combos. Okay, so that's how easy it is to add ground attacks. So next let's look at how to add a stealth attack. So stealth attack is a type that we have over here. So let's add that. And the stealth attack that we're going to add is also going to be a synced action. So synced action means it'll have a synced reaction to play along with the attack. So let me show it to you. So I'll go ahead and create a new attack, and I'll just call this stealth kill. So let me get the animation for that. So I'll use this animation called stealth assassination that I got from Mixamo. It's just a rear naked choke attack like this. Okay, so this is going to be a synced attack. So for synced attacks, we don't have to specify the impact time or the hitbox to use or anything. Synced attacks will play the reaction even if the hit was not registered. Okay, so let's define the reaction for this. So the reaction animation is called stealth assassination victim. Okay, so you can also preview the reaction from here. All right, so these attack and reaction animation should be played at the same time, or we can say it should be synced, right? It's a synced action. So for this reaction, we have to check the is synced checkbox. Okay, and here we have an additional property called sync start time. So if you want to start the syncing at some later time in the animation, you can use this. But for most synced action, you won't need that because the attack and the reaction will be an animation clip of same length. Okay, so if you look at the animation clip, you can see that the length of the attack is 6.2 seconds and the length of the reaction is also 6.2 seconds. So most synced actions will be like this. But in case if you have any actions in which the synced reaction should start from the middle or something, then you can use this slider. Okay, so in our case, we can leave it at 0. Next, for synced actions like this, we have to make sure that the attacker is at a specific distance from the target, right? Otherwise, this action won't match. So in attacks, we have a feature called move to target to move and place the attacker at a specific distance from the target. Okay, so we have different options here: linear, scale root motion, and snap. So linear is the easiest one. So I'll just use that for this attack. Scale root motion will use target matching by scaling the root motion of the attack. This is useful for attacks in which the attacker goes through the air. For example, an attack like flying kick. There is actually an example of that in the demo scene. So for simple attack like this, I can use a linear movement. And here we can specify the time window in which the movement should happen, right? So for an attack like this, the movement should happen in the first few frames. So I'll keep it somewhere around here. The movement towards the target should happen between this small window right before the synced action. Okay. And then we can also specify the distance from the target where the attacker should reach. So this will be different for different attack. You'll have to find this out by trial and error, but usually a value between 0.5 and 1 would do fine. For this action, I know that 0.5 is the perfect value so that the attacks and reactions will be played perfectly. Okay, so let's actually add this attack to our weapon and try testing it. Okay, so I'll add a new attack and this will be a stealth attack. And for the attack, I'll add our stealth kill. Okay, so let's try testing this. Alright, so you can see that it did not work. It's a mess. So the reason for that is because for most attacks, we have this rotate to attacker checkbox turned on so that the target will face the attacker, right? But for this attack, we don't want the target to face the attacker because this attack is performed from the back side of the target, right? So we don't want the target to face the player. Instead, we want the target to face his back towards the player, right? So for that, we can use this property called rotation offset. Okay, so since we want the target to face his back towards the player, we can set the angle as 180. All right, and now the stealth attack should work perfectly. So let's try testing it again. Okay, so that is working, but the player just got up and attacked us. But this is an attack where the target should be killed. So what we have to do is we have to turn on this finisher checkbox. Okay, so this will make sure to kill the target. So you can have different types of finishers. You can either have it as a stealth attack where the player is undetected by the enemy, or you can even play finishers when the enemy's health is low. I'll be showing an example of that when we implement sword combat because I don't have a good finisher animation for hand-to-hand combat. Okay, so let's try doing the stealth attack now, and the enemy should die immediately. And should not get up. Okay, so yeah, now you can see that the enemy is dead and the enemy won't get up as he did before. Okay, so now since we have a stealth attack, it would be better to give a different weapon for the enemy and the player, right? We don't want the enemy to perform things like stealth attack. So I'll just duplicate this and I'll create another weapon called bare hands enemy. And from this weapon, I'll remove the stealth attack and I'll assign that weapon to the enemy. Okay, so let's try testing it now. Alright, it works as before. The next thing I want to prove is if I'm standing at a distance from the enemy, you can see that the enemy is still performing the left hook and right hook combo, right? So left hook is an attack that is more suited for a close range. So when the enemy is performing it at a distance like 2 meters, it won't hit the player, right? So we need to add another attack that can be performed from a longer range like 2 meters. Okay, and then based on the range, we have to select between the attacks. So let's look at how to do that. So I'll go inside attacks and I'll just duplicate this right hook and I'll create another attack called right haymaker. Okay, so let me change the animation for it. I'll search for haymaker and this is the animation that I want to use. So this animation covers a bit more distance. We can actually preview it from the animation preview scene. So yeah, you can see that this animation covers a bit more distance, somewhere around 2 meters. So we can use this if the enemy is farther away from the player. All right. So next we have to change the impact time for this. So let me find the right impact time. So yeah, we can start it from here and end it somewhere around here. Okay. The hitbox to use will be the right hand, and let's add a reaction for this. I'll just choose hit high front weak. Okay. This is how the reaction will look like. All right. So let's add this attack to the attacks list of the enemy. So here I'll create a new attack and let me just put it right below the left hook. The order doesn't really matter, but I just like to put the normal attacks first. So this is a single attack. So I'll change the attack type to single and let me change the attack here to right haymaker. All right. So we have two attacks. One is a left hook right hook combo. Another one is a right haymaker. And we have to specify the distance at which each one should be performed, right? So here we have a button called root motion distance with which you can find the distance that is covered by the first attack in the attacks list. Okay, so the left hook covers 0.84 meters and the haymaker covers around 1.68 meters, right? So note that this is the distance covered by the root. The actual hitbox might cover a bit more distance, but it'll give you an idea about what distance range to use over here, right? So I'll say if the distance is between 0 and 1, then the left hook should be performed. And if the distance is between 1 and 2, then the haymaker should be performed. Okay, so let's try testing this and see if it works. Okay, so yeah, if I'm standing at a distance from the enemy is performing the haymaker. But if I'm standing closer to the enemy will perform the left hook right hook combo. Okay, So you can use this technique and keep adding more attacks that can be performed from longer ranges. Okay. So up next, let's add counterattacks. Counterattacks are like one of the most important features in these kinds of combat systems. So let's look at how to set up counterattacks in the system. So for counterattacks, I'll be using animations from this asset called hand-to-hand non-lethal counters. So right now the enemy has two normal attacks, right? One is a left hook and other one is a right haymaker. So we want to find counters for both these attacks. Okay. So usually you can use the same counters for all the punches with left hand and another counter for all the punches with right hand. Okay. So first let's create a counter for the left hook. So I'll go inside attacks and from here I'll create a new attack and I'll call this counter left hook. Okay. And let me assign the animation for it. So I'll search for counter punch. And here we have lots of counter animation that comes with this asset. So I'm going to choose this counter punch left hook. Okay. So since this is a counter punch, the attack clip is named as victim in this asset. Okay. So let me actually show you the animation properly. So this is the animation. We have the attacker and victim over here. So the attacker performs a left hook and the victim will slip that attack and punch back. Okay, let's look at the victim. The victim will slip the left hook and return with another left hook of his. All right. So one thing to note here is that I actually trimmed the animation a bit. So in the animation that comes with the asset, the whole left hook is performed. But since we're using it as a counter attack, we don't want the whole attack. We just want to start from somewhere around here, right? Because the fighter will already be performing the left hook as an attack, and then we can transition to this counter attack. So for counter attacks, you don't need the whole attack. You just need the part from which the counter happens. Okay, so the counter happens from around this point, but I'll keep it at somewhere around 8, frame 8, and I'll start this animation from here. Okay, so since this is 8, we also have to make the victim's animation 8, because since these two are synced animation, it'll be good if both the attack and reaction has the same time. All right. And another thing to note is that by default, these animations has bake into pose for the exit root transform, but you want to turn it off because if that is turned on, you won't have any root motion. Okay. You can turn it on for other two, but for the exit axis, we want the root motion. All right. So let's go ahead and implement this counter attack. So this will be the counter attack. It's marked as victim over here, so don't get confused by that. And I'll override the reaction, and the reaction is marked as counter punch left hook attacker. Okay. So since this is going to be a synced action, we don't have to specify the impact time or hitbox reduce or anything. We just have to check this is synced checkbox. Okay. And next, we also have to move the attacker and target close to each other so that the counter makes sense. So for counter attacks, I like to use snap as a move type, and I like to snap the victim towards the attacker immediately. Okay, so reason is because when we start the counter attack, we want both characters to be at the exact distance in which that counter makes sense, right? So what I like to do is I like to snap the victim instead of just moving it gradually towards the correct position. You can see these kind of snaps in lots of games while performing counterattacks. So the reason for that is because the distance between those characters has to be exact before starting the counterattack, right? So counterattacks can start with the player holding the hand of the target and all. So if the distance is not correct, that will look really weird. Okay, so I'm going to use snap, and here we have two types of snap: local position and distance. I'm just going to use distance, and I'll just leave the distance at 1. Okay, and yeah, that is all we have to do to create the counter attack. So next, we have to assign this counter attack as the counter of our left hook punch. Okay, so for that, I'll select the left hook punch, and in here, I'll check on can be countered. Okay, so here we can add multiple counter attacks for an attack. So in our case, we just have one. So I'll go ahead and assign the counter left hook as the counter attack. And here the next important thing is the counter start time. Okay, so that's the time at which the counter should start. All right, so we want to start it somewhere around here, right? If we look at our counter animation, it starts from here, right? So we need a similar starting point in our counter start time. Okay, so a starting point like this should be fine. You won't see a big difference because there'll be blending, but try to make those poses as similar as possible. Okay, and then we have max distance over here. So this is the maximum distance at which the counter can be performed. Okay, so if a counter can be performed from long distances, that won't look good because the snap will be like really obvious. Okay, so that's the reason why we are limiting distance. And then we have the health threshold. So this is used to create finisher counters and stuff. So for example, I can add another counter, and I can set the health threshold to something like 10%. And now what will happen is the second counter that we have will only be performed when the health of the attacker is below 10%. Okay, in that case, you could do a counter attack that just kills the enemy. It's a common feature in games like Assassin's Creed, Sleeping Dogs, and all that. So instead of doing a simple left hook counter, you could do a more lethal counter. Okay, but I'm just going to remove it for now since we only have a single counter. And you could even add more counters with the same health threshold. And if you add that, one of these counters will be selected randomly. Okay, this could be used to add variety to your combat so that the players are not bored by seeing the same counter animations again and again. All right, so this is all we have to do to set up the counter. So let's try testing this. So the button that I've assigned for the counter is Q. So you can change those from the combat input manager script of the player. Okay, so the key I've used for counter is Q. So let's go ahead and test this. So I'll try to press Q during the left hook. And yeah, you can see that we are performing a counter, right? If I press the Q at the right time, the player will perform the counter. But right now we can't counter the haymaker because we don't have a counter assigned for the haymaker. So let's also create a counter for the haymaker. So I'll just duplicate the counter left hook, and I'll rename this as counter haymaker. Actually, I'll just give it a general name so that it can be used for multiple attacks that uses the right hand. Okay, you can also use this for the right hook if you want. So this is counter, wrist, lock, and back fist. So this is kind of counter where the player locks the wrist of the attacker while he's punching. Okay, so in these kind of animations, the snap is a must because otherwise it won't look good. Okay, so let's find the animation first. So this is the animation I want to use, wrist lock, back fist. So again, let's look at the animation from here. Okay, so you can see that I'm starting the animation from the point in which the hand is getting caught. Okay, so this animation is a bit more bigger and it includes the part where the punch is thrown, but we don't want that, right? We just want the part at which the hand is getting caught. So always remember that for counter attacks, you don't want the whole attack animation of the attacker. You just want to start from the point at which the counter happens, right? That will be around the impact of the attack animation. So let's go ahead and assign this to our scriptable object. All right, so we have assigned the attack clip. So next let's change the reaction clip also. So this is the reaction clip, and you can also play it from here or preview it from the preview scene. Okay, and we also have to snap it, and in this case the snap has to be a bit more perfect because if not, the hand of the attacker won't be caught correctly by the player. All right, so let's actually test this out. So first we have to assign it to our haymaker. Okay, so here I'll turn on can't be countered, and for the counter I'll just search for wrist lock and back fist. All right, and then we have to set the counter start time, so it can be somewhere around here at the end of the attack's impact. All right, so let's try testing this now. Okay, so the counter is working, but the distance is not quite right. The hand is not getting caught correctly by the player, right? So we have to reduce the distance of the snap from here. So let's try something like 0.7, and now hopefully they should be much more closer and the hand should be caught. So yeah, you can see that the hand is being caught. Okay, and by the way, you could add uh, audio effects and all to the counter. You can come here and add the sound. But in case of counter, the audio won't be a simple hit animation. You'll have to like have the audio for the catching part and then the hitting part and all that. Okay, so keep that in mind. I just have a simple delayed punch audio for the counter. All right, it doesn't sound that good, but yeah, you can use more matching audio by recording it by yourself. Okay, so next thing I want to improve is right now, if we keep spamming the counter button, we'll never get hit, right? So we don't have to time the counter button or anything. The counter will always be performed if we just keep spamming the counter button. All right. So we need to prevent the misuse of the counter button. So a lot of games handle this differently. Some games prevent this misuse by playing some kind of taunting action if the counter button is pressed while the enemy is not attacking, right? So if you try to spam it, then the player will go to some taunt action in which he's likely to get hit. Okay, and in some other games like Batman, Arkham series, what it does is they won't prevent you from spamming the counter button. You can do it and like counter every single attack, but if you do that, your combo count won't go up. Okay, so in Batman they have a combo count which will make the attacks more and more powerful as they increase. But if we keep spamming, the combo count won't go up. So yeah, there are different ways of handling this. So in the system, there is a way to play some action if the counter is misused. So if you select the weapon and scroll down here below the can counter checkbox, you can see another checkbox called play action if counter misused. So if you check that, you can provide an animation clip here. Usually it will be some kind of a taunt action, and if the player presses the counter button while the enemy is not attacking, then that taunt action will be played. Okay, so let me just find a taunt action so that we can test this. Okay, let me try running it. So now if I try to misuse the counter by spamming the counter input, then you can see that we'll play a taunt action and we'll get hit, right? But if I time it perfectly by just pressing the counter once, then we'll perform the counter correctly. Okay, so this is one way of preventing the misuse of counter input. And you also have a event provided to you in the melee fighter script. So if you open the events, you have like different events over here: on attack, on got it, and all that. This is a good way to expand the system and do some custom stuff when an event happens. Okay, so here we also have an event called on counter misused. So if you want to handle some custom logic like resetting the combo count or something like that, if the counter is misused, then you can do it by subscribing to this event. Okay, this is a Unity event, but if you want to use a normal C# event directly from the code, then you can directly subscribe to the on counter misused event over here. Okay, so since you have the whole source code of the system, you can modify it however you want. All right, so we have added counter attacks and we have prevented the misuse of counter input. So next, let's implement blocking. All right, so to implement blocking, we have to turn on this can block checkbox. Okay, so in here, first we have to provide an animation for blocking. So let me find the animation. Let's search for block and I'll choose an animation like this. Okay, and then we can specify things like the percentage of block damage. So if you want to take a little bit of damage even while the player is blocking, then you can use this. If you don't want any damage while blocking, then you can just turn it to 0. Okay, and then we have things like the reaction data. So as I mentioned before, you can add reactions by creating a reaction object, or you can directly add it by overriding it from the attack, right? You can override the reaction like this, and you also have an option to override the blocked reaction. Okay, but in the case of blocking, we could use a common reaction for like most of the punches, right? So we don't have to go ahead and assign an animation in each attack. Instead, we can just create a reaction object and assign it directly to the reaction data over here. All right, so let's do that. So over here, I'm going to create a new reaction data. I'll just call this bare hands blocked reaction. Okay, and here we can add any number of reactions we have. So for each direction, you can add a reaction, and then you can also specify a direction in the attack, and based on direction, the reaction will be selected. Okay, So for our blocked reaction, we just have a single reaction. Okay, so I'll choose that. This is the blocked hit reaction, and we can assign it to our weapon. Okay, I'll assign it over here. And now when we run the game, we should be able to block while we are in combat. Okay, so I can press the right mouse button to block, and you can see that while we get hit during the blocked state, we are playing a different reaction. Okay, so while blocking, it'll be good to have a different audio effect so that the player can understand that it's a blocked hit, right? So let's give a different sound effect for the attack when they're blocked. So let me select all my attacks, and under the effects, we have blocked hit sound. So let me just find an audio for that. And now if we test the game, you can see that we're playing a different audio when we are blocking the attacks. All right, so that is working fine. So right now we're using a reactions object and playing the same blocked reaction for all the attacks, right? But this reaction won't work for all cases. So for example, let's say if we have a low kick, it cannot be blocked like this, right? So you'll have to use both the reaction object and the override reactions of the attack together. Okay, so let's try overriding one of the blocked reaction just so that we can understand how it works. It is pretty similar to how we override the normal reactions. Okay, so here let's try to use a different blocked reaction for the haymaker. So let's find the animation clip for that. So I'll use this block overhand punch animation. Haymaker is pretty much like an overhand punch for those who know about boxing punches. Okay, and you can view the blocked reaction from here itself. All right, so this is the blocked reaction, and we'll have to make this blocked reaction a synced reaction. The reason is because this is kind of like a parry where it takes a few frames for the player to raise the hand and place it at the blocking position. Okay, so let me actually show you what will happen if this is not synced so that you can understand why we are making it synced. Okay, so let me try to block the overhand, and you can see that we're playing the block animation after we get hit, right? But since this reaction is like a parry in which it'll take a few frames to raise the hand and go to the block position, we'll have to make it a synced reaction. Okay, and we have to give it a sync start time. So you'll have to find it by trial and error. Somewhere around here should be fine. So let's try testing it now. Okay, so if I try to block the haymaker, you can see that I'm blocking it correctly since we made it a synced reaction. Okay, so we have looked at how to set up blocking and parrying. So next, the one thing I want to improve is the movement of the characters. So what if you want to override the movement of the character when the character equips a weapon? So these animations that you see right now are the default animations that comes with the asset while we are in the combat mode, right? But we can't use this animation for all weapons. So for example, let's say you are holding a sword, then this kind of blocking stance won't work for the sword, right? You'll have to override the movement animation. And these animations are also not perfect. You can see that while the player and enemy is moving, there is a little bit of sliding, right? So it's better to override these animations and use more professional animations that you get from animation assets. Okay, so let's look at how we can override the movement animation for a weapon. So for that, you have to open the advanced foldout and we have to assign an override controller over here. Okay, so what's an animator override controller? It is something that we can use to override some of the animations in our animator. Okay, so if we select the player and go to the animator, you can see that combat controller is the animator controller that we're using by default. So if you want to override animations in this, you have to create an override controller. Okay, so let's create an override controller. So I'll right click and I'll go to create and select animator override controller. I'll name this as bare hands override controller. Okay, and in here first we have to specify the animator controller that we want to override. Okay, so we know that the default animator controller is combat controller. So I'll choose that, and then from here we can override all the animations that we have in our combat controller. Okay, so this is most useful when you have different weapons like sword or axe, because you can't use normal walking and running animations with those weapons. Okay, but let's also change it for our hand-to-hand combat. I want to override all the combat movement, so those are animations that start with combat, like combat idle, combat walk, combat diagonal walk, and all that. So I want to override all of these animations and replace it with animations from a professional pack. So to replace these animations, we can just click here and choose the animation that we want to replace. Okay, so let me just search for the walk animation that I have. So yeah, I'll be using animations from this pack. So here we have versions without root motion and with root motion. So using the animations with root motion might be better, so that we can just turn on the root motion in the weapon settings and we don't have to worry about the speed and all that. If your animations doesn't have root motion, then you'll have to like override the speed manually and figure out the speed of that animation. Okay, so I'll be using these animations with root motion. So let me assign them one by one. Okay, from here I'll select the override controller and I'll lock it, and then I'll drag and drop the animations one by one. Okay, so here I don't want to use walk back, I want to use the walk back with root motion. And also we can't drag and drop the FBX there. We have to find the clip and drag and drop that. Alright, let me just put the correct animation there. And similarly, I'm going to assign and replace all the combat walk animation. Okay, so I believe I've assigned all the walk animations correctly. So next, let's also replace the idle animation because we want it to match with these walk animations, right? So let me find the idle animation from this pack. All right. So yeah, we have assigned everything now. So now we can just unlock it and we can assign the controller, the override controller to the weapon. So under the advanced foldout, let's assign the override controller. And since our animations use root motion, we can simply click on use root motion and the character will be moved based on the animation's root motion. Okay, so if you did not have root motion, then you'll have to like override the move speed and assign a different value there. So in our case, we just have to use root motion. So let's try testing this. All right, so now you can see that we're using different combat walk animations. And since we're using root motion, it looks much better. There is no sliding. All right, so try to use animations with root motion for combat movement. All right, so we have a lot of other properties here in weapon. Here we can assign animations while we equip the weapon and unequip it. It's not really relevant for hand-to-hand combat, but this can be used for weapons like sword, where you can equip and unequip. Okay, so yeah, now we have set up a combat system with combos, charged attacks, knockdown state, ground attacks, blocking, counter attacks, and all that. So yeah, we can actually try adding more enemies and try testing it with more of them. Okay, so once the enemies ceases, they'll come and attack us one by one. All right, we can also counter the attacks and all that. Okay, so when we have more enemies, we won't be able to win by just spamming the attack. We'll have to strategically perform attacks and counter attacks to win the fight. Okay, so the system uses a free flow type of combat where all the enemies will not attack the player at once. That'll create a mess, right? If you look at combat of games like Batman or Assassin's Creed, you can see that all the enemies don't attack the player at once, right? They attack one by one. And by the way, you can control how the enemies attack the player from the enemy manager script. So here we have parameters like time range between attacks. So this means the time between each attack will be between 1 and 4 seconds. Okay, you can make it longer or shorter based on your preference. And then we have another property in which we can specify the criteria by which we should select the enemy to attack. Okay, so this can be the time weighted distance or a combination of both. So if it's time weighted, then the enemy that is weighted the most without performing an attack will be the one to attack the player. Okay, so in that case, the enemies will always attack the player in the same order. But that might not look that good because if there are enemies closer to the player, then that enemy should have more priority to do an attack, right? So that's why we have the distance criteria. So if this is chosen, then the enemy that's closest to the player will always be the one to attack the player. Okay, or you can use a combination of both. So this will take into consideration both the distance and time weighted and will choose the enemy to attack based on the value of both distance and time weighted. Okay, so yeah, we should play with these properties and try to figure out what works for you. Okay, so next, let's try adding a sword to our characters and let's try to set up a simple sword combat. So to add an external weapon like a sword, the setup is pretty similar to what we did for the bare hands weapon, but there are some additional steps. You have to create the model of the weapon and you have to spawn that, or you have to attach it to the character's hand. Okay, so let's look at how to do that. So first I'll go ahead and create a new weapon and I'll call it sword, and now we can set up attacks for it. So creating attacks with a sword is pretty much the same as creating attacks for the hand-to-hand combat. So I'm not going to create those attacks from scratch. To save time, I've already created two attacks with the sword, and let me create those as a combo. Okay, so the first attack is called slash one, and the second attack is /2. Okay, so this is pretty much same as the attacks that we created before for the hand combat. Okay, the only difference is for the attacks with an external weapon, the hitbox to use should be weapon. Okay, so we've assigned the attacks of the sword. So next, let's open the advanced foldout and let's assign our right controller, because by default our combat movement is boxing style movement, right? So we can't use that for sword. So just like we assigned in our right controller for the bare hands weapon, let's also assign one for the sword. So again, to save time, I've already created the our right controller. So let me assign it. So next, we have to create the model of this weapon, right? So I have a model of the sword. So this is the model. So we have to do some setup on it, like adding colliders and all. So first let me actually unpack this so it won't be a prefab anymore, and we can easily make changes to it. And to set up the weapon model, first we have to add a box collider to it. Okay, so this is the box collider. You can click on this to edit the volume if you want. You could change its size so that it only covers the sharp area of the sword and doesn't cover the handle. Okay, and next we have to make this box collider a trigger, and we can actually turn it off by default. The system will turn it on when it's required. Okay, so next we also have to attach a script to our weapon model. So the script we have to attach is called attached weapon. All right, and in here we have to specify the weapon. So let me assign the sword that we created, and if you want we can also assign a trial. So there is actually a trial that comes with the asset by default. So let me find that, and let me just make it a child of our sword model, and I'll place it towards the tip. Okay, and we also have to assign it to the trial property of the attached weapon. Okay, so this is how you set up a weapon. You have to add a collider and attach the attached weapon script. Okay, so now let me actually turn this into a prefab. Okay, and now we have to attach it to the hand of our player and enemy characters, right? So you can either attach it dynamically by checking the spawn weapon checkbox and providing the holder of the weapon and its local position and all that, or you can attach it directly from the hierarchy. So I'll actually show you both ways. For the player, I'll attach directly, and for the enemy, I'll spawn it dynamically. Okay, so we want to attach the sword to the right hand of the player. So you have to keep expanding it until you find the right hand. So yeah, this is the right hand game object. Note that we have a right hand hitbox over here. It's a weapon that is automatically attached to the hand and it's used for the hand combat, right? So similarly, we have to add our sword model to the right hand. Okay, let me reset its position to 0 and let me try rotating it so that it fits in the hand. So let me make this global and rotate it. Okay, let me try to place it here. And now to adjust the position, I'll make it local. Okay, this looks fine to me. So the sword is attached to the player's right hand, and we also have to assign the attached sword to the melee fighter script of the player. So we can just drag and drop it to the attached weapons list. Okay, so that is how you attach a weapon manually to a character. So now if we use sword as weapon, the player should perform the attacks of the sword. Okay, so let me just delete the other sword model that we have in the scene, and let me try testing this. Okay, so yeah, you can see that the player is performing the attacks of the sword. Alright, and the movement is also changed since we used an override controller. Okay, so yeah, you can keep adjusting the sword till it's placed perfectly in the hand. So I think the rotation has to be a bit more vertical. So let me select the sword and change this to global and change the rotation a bit. So yeah, after playing around with it a bit, I find this position of the sword to be okay. So yeah, that looks much better. Alright, so next we also have to attach the sword to our enemies. So for the enemy, let's spawn the sword model dynamically instead of attaching it manually to each of the enemies. So I'll duplicate the player's sword and I'll rename this to sword enemy, and in this case I'll check the spawn weapon because I don't want to manually attach the weapon to all my enemies. And for the model, I'll assign the sword model, and the holder will be the right hand because we want it attached to the right hand. And then we have to set the local position and local rotation. So since we have already found the position and rotation for the player, we can just copy that. Just right click on the position, select copy, and paste it in here. Okay, let me also do that for the rotation. In the case of rotation, you have to copy the Euler angles, not the quaternion, and then just paste it into the local rotation over here. Okay, and then we have to change the weapon of each of our enemy. So I'll select all the enemies and I'll change the weapon to sword enemy. Okay, so now when we run the game, you can see that the swords are dynamically added to the enemy's hand. Okay, okay, looks like we have an issue here. The enemy is not getting hit by the sword. Okay, there is one thing I've missed. You have to set the tag of the sword model to hitbox. Okay, only then it'll register a hit. So let's try this again. So yeah, you can see that the player's hits are being registered now. All right, we can also perform counter attacks and all that. All right. By the way, you don't have to equip the weapon by default. You can also set this dynamically while running the game if you don't want the characters to be equipped with weapon by default. Okay, and by the way, these weapons also have an equip and unequip animations. So if you have those, then when you attach the weapon, the character will play the equip animation, and the character will also play the unequip animation when the weapon is removed. All right, So in case of an external weapon like sword, you just have to set up the model like this and attach it to the character or spawn it dynamically. Okay, so that's the only additional step. Everything else is same as what we've covered so far for the hand combat. Okay, so let me also cover one thing over here. So in the hand combat, I covered finisher attacks, but I only showed stealth finisher attacks, right? You can also have finisher attacks that will be played when the target's health is low. Okay, so let's look at how to add such an attack. So here I'll add a new attack and I'll make this single. Everything like distance will be the same. The only thing we have to change here is the health threshold. Okay, so just to make it easy to test, I'll say if the health threshold goes below 50%, then we have to perform the finisher attack instead of performing our normal combo. Okay, so now we have to assign an attack here. So I've already created an attack called kneel knee slash. It's just a synced reaction where the player kills the enemy. So let's go ahead and assign that. Okay. By the way, usually in games, the health threshold will be like lower, like 10%, but I'm just using 50% to make it easier to test. All right. And I'll also remove the other enemies so that we can easily test it on a single enemy. All right. So yeah, you can see that once the enemy's health was low, we performed the finisher attack and killed the enemy. Okay. So yeah, everything seems to work fine. So we could also add an HP bar on our characters to view their current HP. So there's actually a default HP bar that comes with the asset. Let me just find it. It's in the game slash prefabs folder. So here it is. So we just have to drag and drop this to the enemy and player game object. Okay. So this is just a simple HP bar. Feel free to change its images and customize it to your like. Okay. Let me also add it to the player. We have to make it a child of the player. You could assign the melee fighter over here, but it's not necessary since it's a child of the player. The melee fighter will be assigned automatically. Okay, so now if we test, the HP should be displayed on top of the character's head. Okay, so yeah, that is working fine. So we have covered all the important features of the melee combat system. So I recommend you watch this video fully and get a really good understanding of how the system works and how to use it. So yeah, try and use the system to build awesome combat in your games. And if you build something, I'd love to see it. Please showcase it on our Discord server. If you have any further questions about the asset, feel free to ask in the Discord server. So thanks a lot for watching this video, and I can't wait to see the things that you'll make with this system.